Molly, apologize for that. Molly line in Boston, back to her when we get more developments on that. In the meantime, there has been a decision handed down in at least one of the two cases regarding gay marriage in America that we expected today from the U.S. Supreme Court. Apparently, that decision is in regard to the Defense of Marriage Act. Remember, the Defense of Marriage Act was signed into law, passed by Congress, signed into law by President Clinton in 1996. And that now has been challenged, and the U.S. Supreme Court was asked to, well, they were asked to question whether or not it was within the constitutional rights or not, as to whether or not certain Americans could be denied federal protections under law if indeed they were a married couple. Now, Shannon Bream, just out from the U.S. Supreme Court, she's got her gym shoes on, she's running toward our camera. She has the decision now in her hands. And on DOMA, what did the justices decide? Shannon.
It appears, Bill, that they have struck down the portion of DOMA which would ban same-sex couples from getting the same benefits as traditionally married couples. I'll read you a little bit of this opinion authored by Justice Kennedy. He said DOMA divests married same-sex couples of the duties and responsibilities that are an essential part of married life and that they in most cases would be honored to accept were DOMA not enforced. He goes on to say that the class to which DOMA directs its restrictions and restraints are those persons who are joined in same-sex marriages made lawful by their state. So this is talking about different states have different laws, different rules on marriage. So where same-sex married couples are married, their marriages are recognized as valid and legitimate in their state. Because of DOMA, they could not collect a number of federal benefits, more than 1,000 of them. We're talking about tax law and other retirement and survivor benefits, those kinds of things. What Kennedy goes on to say is, DOMA singles out a class of persons deemed by a state entitled to recognition and protection to enhance their own liberty. It imposes a disability on the class by refusing to acknowledge a status the state finds to be dignified and proper. So it sounds like he's saying here, DOMA is no good in as far as it defines marriage as only between one man and woman. It doesn't recognize the federal benefits for same-sex couples who are legally married in their state. Okay, now, Shannon, I'll let you catch your breath there, just so our viewers know you got to run a couple hundred yards down those granite steps there on the U.S. Supreme Court. Just to recap now, DOMA, a law that's been on the books for 17 years now, has been struck down in a 5-4 ruling, which means, Shannon, that couples married in one of the states where same-sex marriage is legal, they will now have access to, 1,100 federal benefits. They will have the rights and protections that are currently provided to opposite-sex married couples under the federal law on the basis of their marital status if they have chosen to get married in a state that recognizes gay marriage. Do I have that right? You do. The close of this opinion by Justice Kennedy, it is a 5-4 opinion by my count. Math is not my strong suit. That's what it looks like right at this moment. He says the federal statute, meaning DOMA, is invalid for no legitimate purpose, overcomes the purpose and effect to disparage and to injure those whom the state, by its marriage laws, sought to protect in personhood and dignity by seeking to displace this protection and treating those persons as living in marriages less respected than others. The federal statute is in violation of the Fifth Amendment. Now, it says this opinion and its holding are confined to those lawful marriages. So it sounds like he's saying in states where these same-sex marriages are valid, the federal government cannot keep those couples from getting the benefits they would under federal laws.
All right, Shannon,
so we'll keep reading, but that's the bottom line.
Right, you 5-4 decision. Kennedy apparently wrote the decision. Want to bring in the judge, Anna Napolitano, our Fox News senior judicial analyst, Brett Baer, standing by as well. We'll get to everybody in the coming hour. First to you, Judge. Are you surprised?
I'm not surprised at this outcome, Bill, from the way the oral argument went, from the fact that the federal government refused to defend the Defense of Marriage Act, and the House of Representatives had to hire outside lawyers to do so. I'm also not surprised, given Justice Kennedy's track record in cases of this nature affecting same-sex issues. This was a very difficult case for the court to uphold DOMA in this context.
How come?
A same-sex couple got married in Canada, where it was legal, moved to New York, and at the time of the death of one of them, same-sex marriage was legal here in New York. Because if they had been an opposite-sex couple, the assets would have passed from the decedent's estate to the living one. It was $1 million. Instead of collecting the $1 million from her deceased spouse, She only collected $650,000. The rest went to the IRS. That would not have happened if they had been an opposite-sex couple. So she's going to get, Edith Windsor is her name. She lives here in New York City. She's going to collect that $350,000 refund from the IRS with interest, as will all same-sex couples married in states where same-sex marriage is lawful. The federal government of the United States of America is now required to recognize marriages of people of the same sex where they have been solemnized, made lawful in states that make them lawful.
DOMA is unconstitutional as a deprivation of the equal liberty of persons that is protected by the Fifth Amendment. It only applies in states that recognize gay marriage. Judge, how many states is that today?
That's about 11 states, Bill. It's hard to say how this would affect states like, for example, New Jersey, where same-sex marriage is prohibited, but civil unions are permitted. And I don't know, though I have the opinion in front of me, if the court addresses that or if the court's going to visit that issue on another day.
All right, Judge, stand by there. When I get back to Shannon Bream. Shannon's been going through the decision while we were talking here. Back to the steps of the Supreme Court. What else do you see there, Shannon?
Well, Bill, you remember during the argument there were a couple of points that stood out. There was this one point where Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who sides with the majority here in striking down this portion of the Defense of Marriage Act, she had said what you're doing is having couples who can get married, same-sex couples that can get married in various states. They can enjoy the benefits under that state, but because of DOMA, they can't get these federal benefits. We talked about more than 1,100 different benefits at issue. And you'll remember the phrase that came from that day of argument. She said, what you're giving them is a skim milk version of marriage. It's not the full milk version. And that seems to be the heart of what this opinion is all about, saying these people are recognized in their states as having legitimate relationships. In many cases, they can adopt children. They can do all kinds of things. They can have survivor benefits and all kinds of things that any other traditionally married couple will have. But because of this federal law, which was passed overwhelmingly bipartisan, with bipartisan majorities in Congress and signed into law by President Bill Clinton, who has since said that DOMA has to go. You'll remember, too, that early on when this case was first filed, it deals with a couple, two women who lived in New York. They were married in Canada and lived in New York, though, and when one of them passed away, the other was left with a huge estate bill because New York at that time didn't recognize their marriage, and federal tax law said that she had to pay that bill. They weren't legally married. At the time that she filed her lawsuit, not too long after that, the federal government, the Attorney General and President Obama came out and said they would not defend DOMA. They would enforce it, but as the legal battles were playing out, they wouldn't defend it. And in the course of this case, they actually flipped sides and went to court fighting against DOMA, even though it is a law on the books, duly passed by Congress and signed by a president. So the administration, this is a big win for them today. Also, they had argued for this provision to go. So this portion of DOMA is gone with the support of the White House and the Attorney General. A big success for them today, Bill. You
mentioned the Obama administration. When I get to the politics of this now, Judge, stand by. Shannon Bream, stand by as well. Brett Baer is with me now. Brett, as I go to you, quote now, reading from the decision, 76 pages in length now. DOMA seeks to injure the very class New York seeks to protect. By doing so, it violates basic due process and equal protection principles applicable to the federal government. Reading from that excerpt now. Brett, on the politics of this, how do you analyze it?
Well, this administration has come full circle on this, originally defending DOMA, then choosing not to defend DOMA, then essentially saying that DOMA needed to be struck down. The president, of course, in his evolution, as he called it, on gay marriage, will now support this ruling. I just want to read one other piece of this from Justice Kennedy, and this, I think, gets to the heart of it, and Shannon really nailed it as well. The federal statute, he says, is invalid for no legitimate purpose overcomes the purpose, in effect, to disparage and injure those whom the state, by its marriage laws, sought to protect in personhood and dignity, by seeking to displace this protection and those persons as living in marriages less respected than others. That's Justice Kennedy. Justice Scalia and Justice Thomas and the Chief Justice all dissented here, saying there was no jurisdiction for the Supreme Court to have this ruling.
Brett, thank you. Kennedy also writes, this places same-sex couples in an unstable position of being in a second-tier marriage, which refers back to what Shannon was talking about. about the skim milk analogy that was used during arguments.